Welcome to Tentative Title with Tim. This is a podcast about creativity, about process, about filmmaking, and about screenwriting. Welcome back to the podcast. So I hope everybody out there is doing well. If you celebrated Easter, I hope it was good. I hope you got to talk with family, or at least spend time with them, or just have friends over or whatever. I hope it was a time that you got to relax and connect with the people that you love. So today's topic, I wanted to talk about the definitive cut. Now, this can mean many different things to any audience member who loves a film. So this is not a new thing of having a director take a film that they've had out in the public for sometimes decades, and they want to make changes to it. The most obvious one is George Lucas with the Star Wars trilogy, the original one. But there have been even more examples of directors taking their films and they see something that's wrong with it, and they decide that they want to make a change to it, or they want to recut it. Just recently, Zack Snyder was able to recut the Justice League into a 4-hour movie. And that is amazing because it meant that he was able to create the film that he originally wanted to make, and he was given the ability and the money to do it. And from what I hear, it's way better than the version that was released in the theaters. So that is great. I think especially since he was the original director and he didn't get a chance to see the vision to the end originally, that he was given that chance to have the final word, so to speak. But there are other films like Blade Runner that have, I think, 10 cuts. 10 cuts of the same film. And I mean, I guess there's one that's called like the final cut. Like, this is Ridley Scott saying this is as far as I'm gonna go. Like, this is the definitive cut of this film. But the one that was released in theaters, and even the one that made it onto DVD, are completely different. And yet there are going to be fans for each one of those cuts. So this becomes complicated when you have an original cut of a film that is part of a franchise, or that is part of a bigger story. Going back to Justice League, the differences, the different things that Zack Snyder put into his film are different than the original theatrical cut. And how does the choices that he made in that film affect the other films around it? And I think this is a really interesting idea, because where does it stop? And I'm not saying that like directors should be forbidden from recutting their films. I think it's actually an interesting experiment to allow a director to recut their film, because the technology caught up with their vision, or they matured over time and they saw how they could have done something better, and just allowing them to make those changes. Like, also Francis Ford Coppola had recut The Godfather Part 3. And from what I know, there was only some shifting of scenes. Maybe a couple things were recut. Some new music cues were put in. It doesn't sound like very much was changed, but yet, which version of the film do we look at and say, well, this is the continuation of the uh, Corleone story of the saga? Because I haven't seen it, so I don't know what the differences are. But allowing a director to go in and make these changes to a film that has been around for a while, like uh, how does that change things? How does that signal to the next generation that they can kind of slap a film together and it's okay because they can just go back if the film becomes popular, they can go back in later and make changes and to just kind of like upend the version that people love, if it's a version that becomes popular. And I, I don't want to say it like opens a can of worms with the fact that it gives license to filmmakers to be able to do that, because I there are plenty of examples of a studio rushing a film into theaters and the director was sidelined and the version that's out in the world is not what the director really wanted, or they didn't have time to really put together their full vision, and to have an opportunity to like make changes to it and to make it better, like that will benefit everybody, the audience overall, because they get a better film. But I just don't know where it stops. Like should it stop with franchises? Because if you make a change in one film, then how does that affect the entire world of other films that have to follow that film, or that like the choices that a character makes in a recut of this film may play out differently because of the choices that that same character made in another film that will not be recut, that has been out for a while. And it's not to say that like that studios haven't put movies in movie theaters and that version played, and then when it was time for it to come out on DVD, that they didn't make some changes. Like we weren't really aware of it, but there were changes that were made from the theatrical version to the version that ended up on DVD, or the one that was um, presented to the public, or like for that was sold to the public for like home video or whatever. So this has been happening for a while. I guess we just never were as much aware of it, and maybe we weren't as much aware of it until George Lucas made major changes to the original Star Wars. Like I saw those reissues in theaters, and at the time I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like look at all these different things that he was able to do that he wasn't able to do back in the late 70s and early 80s. Like some of those scenes were actually quite amazing to see. But after seeing those, I really wanted to keep the originals, because the originals were the, I guess, purest form of what I grew up with, of the version that I loved. Even if it had flaws, even if there were so many different things that were wrong with it, it was still the version that I loved more than the reissues. Like I still do. I don't like. I'll watch the reissued ones with all the new effects and stuff, but uh, I'm not excited to watch them sometimes, because I'm like, I'm more excited to watch the flawed original ones that I got a long time ago, than I am watching these new ones that George Lucas thought he was making better. And it's not because like all of what he did was bad. It's just there were certain choices where I just didn't understand why they needed to be changed in the first place, and yet they were changed, and I was like, yeah, well, I don't care about that. The original was better. Don't change it, And maybe I'm the only one who thought that some of these changes didn't need to be made, but it just like he made those changes. It was his vision, and he made the kind of movie that he wanted to make, and he put in the changes he wanted to make, and that's his vision. And would I do the same thing? I don't know. I've never had a big movie like Star Wars, and I don't know if I would have the guts to go back into a film like that is so revered and just start making changes to it. I don't know if I would ever come to a place where I could do that. Um, but with that, and okay, so we'll talk about like the there's the visual effects changes obviously, but there's the famous scene of Han shooting Greedo. It's like that actually changes the character of Han Solo. Like, what, there was no reason to change it, and it makes Han Solo's character like like he's supposed to be a scoundrel that gradually becomes redeemed because he wants to fight for the against the Empire. Like he sees that there's good in fighting, and not just like being a smuggler, but actually being part of the cause, of being one of the rebels. And that arc needs to be there, but it's like, well, if we don't think that he's a bad guy, it's like how much of him is being redeemed, like from changing that one scene. And that's those small changes. It's like okay, let me get more specific, because I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. But when you're making changes that change a character, I I think, and especially if it's within a franchise where the repercussions of that one change is going to reverberate out throughout the entire story in which that character is involved. Like, there should be some, like, I don't want to say like stopping the filmmaker from making those changes, but just, yeah, it seems like somebody should say, keep the story intact, keep the characters intact, but maybe clean up like some crappy special effects that you had in there. Make things look a little better. Maybe clean up the sound mix. You know, sure, like maybe recut some things that maybe were a bit choppy, but like don't change the story. Don't change like what these characters are, and where their journey goes. Um, so to me it's a complicated thing, and it kind of depends on the film, because I think we, as much as we can find examples of why not to do it, we can find examples of why you should do it. And it really depends on who's watching the film, and what history they have with the film. Because if you grew up watching the original version of a film and then they suddenly come out with a new version, you may just automatically reject that new version because you already love what it was before. But there's a new generation who may have never seen the original, and they see this new version, and that becomes their favorite. Like, I'll come back to Star Wars. Like, there are plenty of young kids who saw the reissues and probably fell in love with that version of the film, and love it more than if they saw the original. The original might even be completely boring because the special effects aren't as spectacular. So, like I said, it's complicated, but I just I think it's an interesting conversation to have, because of the fact that if we're allowing directors to make changes to their films, how many versions of a film are we going to get? And I would rather have a conversation about the film itself and not this um, endless conversation about which version is the best. Because a conversation about film should be about the contents of the film. It should be about like what happens with the characters. What does it all mean? What is the plot saying about about the world, or does it relate to what's happening in real life? Like there are so many more deeper conversations that we can be having about any particular film. But when we have multiple versions of a film, it's kind of like we're having multiple versions of, I guess, truth. Or I mean, like that's being a bit like hyperbolic, but the like if everybody has a different uh, version of a film that they love, it becomes impossible to talk about the film itself, because it ends up turning into a, well, he shouldn't have changed that, or why did they cut that, or why was that sound mix different, or what, it becomes more about the technical aspects of it than it does about the story or about the characters or about like anything else. Like you have to get through that conversation of which version is definitive before you even get to talking about the story and the characters. And I, like I said, if I was on the other side of this and I had a film that was really popular and I had a chance to recut it, I don't know if I would. I don't know if I would have the guts to do it. I think I would look around at the audience who loves it and say, you know what? They love this version of the film. Yeah, maybe I don't love it as much. Maybe I see all the mistakes and all the things I could have done better, or all the different like missed opportunities that I could have done while I was on set, or in the cutting room, or just making, well, whatever creative choice in the making of it. But ultimately, once it's out in the public, like, doesn't that film belong to the public now? Especially if it's a cultural event, if it's something that captures the imagination of fandom, or of just of the audience. Like, it, should a filmmaker be allowed to make a change to a film? And sometimes maybe the version that the filmmaker hates has to be the definitive version, because it is the one that most people love. I don't know. I just it, like I said, it's complicated in my mind, and there's so many different ways that we can talk about this, because of the fact that it is subjective. It's a it depends on what generation you grew up in. Depending on the film you're talking about, like, it gets to be so complicated and applies differently to every film that's out there. And I'm excited about that conversation, but I'm also just, it's just such a it's so irritating. It's such an irritating thing, subject to talk about, because I want to talk about good stories, but I also love the experiment of having different versions of a film, because um, seeing, like, for one of my editing classes, we were given footage to cut together, and every person in that class cut together the same footage that all of us was given, and each person was different. Like, the 10 people in the class, 10 different versions of of that footage, and I'm fascinated from a technical standpoint, because I'm like, yeah, like, you can cut multiple versions of something with the same footage, and that's fascinating. But when you're making something for the masses, like, where does it stop? Like, should like should there be like some kind of rule that, like, if your film grosses a certain amount of money, like, you can't, sorry, your film grossed $1 billion, so yeah, you're not recutting that. Like, you can have it on the special features, you can have like deleted scenes, but yeah, you're not changing this because it is clear the public loves this version, and sorry, you can't change it. So anyway, guys, that's what's been going through my mind for the past couple weeks. Ever since the Snyder Cut came out for Justice League, I've just been fascinated with how people have been responding to that version as opposed to the one in the theaters, and then all the other like DC films and how different they could have been, and it's just it's endless, and it's like I said, it's irritating and it's fascinating, and it makes me excited about the how we're able to do so much with film, and yet it kind of like not frightens me, but just I kind of wish people would just filmmakers would say, well, I made that film, I made the mistakes that I made, I moved on to the next one, I got better, and each film I did, I got better and better and better, and I decided not to look back. I just kept going. Like I just wish filmmakers would just keep looking forward and say, you know what, that was a time in my life that I made this kind of film, and now I've become a better filmmaker because of all those mistakes, and now those mistakes are going to be there forever, because like that's how an artist grows. They go through the learning and the growing, and they're different phases. So anyway, guys, I hope this is as fascinating to you as it is to me, and if you want to talk more about it, you can find me on Twitter. You can email the podcast. So anyway, guys, once again, hope you're doing well. Hope you're still wearing the masks and washing the hands and social distance and all that stuff. Things are well, I don't know how things are, because it sounded like things were doing pretty well here in the United States, but I guess it depends on what state you're in, and then like across the world, it sounds like things are starting to go back into lockdown, and that really sucks. And yeah, I hate the fact that we're still here, but we'll get through this, guys. So anyway, I guess that's all I got for today. So I'll talk to you on the next one. And also, if you want to connect with me, I have a email for the podcast. It's tentative.title.with.tim.podcast@gmail.com. Also, I have a Twitter account for the podcast where I post episodes, and that is @title_Tim. And you can find also on the Facebook page, I have a page for the podcast, so you can connect with me there. Looking forward to hearing from all of you, and until then, I'll catch you on the next one.